Review copy provided by WayForward. Thank you so much. As both a longtime fan of the RWBY animated series and the Shantae series of games, you would think that a RWBY game being developed by WayForward, and more specifically, one being touted as developed by, and I quote, key members of the Shantae dev team would be right up my alley. And you would be right. When RWBY Arrowfell was announced, it immediately caught my eye, and since then, I have been ever so excitedly anticipating its release. But when I finally got my hands on the game, a RWBYified version of a search action series that I have loved for what feels like ages, is not what I got. But I don't think what I got is all that bad either. It's complicated. Hey everyone, I'm RV Rocks, and RWBY Arrowfell starts off with Team RWBY being pointed in the direction of these monsters known as Grimm. And you know what, I'll just start off here and say that this video is probably not for those who don't have at least a cursory knowledge of RWBY. I mean, to be fair, I don't know who would come watch this review if they weren't fans of the show already, but this game kind of requires an audience that is more than familiar with the property already. Other than this intro text, the game assumes you know the world and characters. So for the purposes of this review, I am gonna do just the same. In fact, the game starts off with a decently large plot point from the original show. After Team RWBY become officially licensed Huntresses, Ironwood gives Team RWBY a mission to hunt down Grimm that then spirals into a wild goose chase throughout all corners of Atlas and Mantle to expose political corruption in the city. And in terms of a plot summary, I'm not going to go too much deeper than that, because I imagine if you're watching a review for this game, then you might want to play it, and if you want to play this game, the story will probably be the thing that you get the most out of. So for all intents and purposes, I'm going to leave it there. The game appears to take place during this montage that occurs in Volume 7, Episode 5, meaning that we get all the lovely interactions with the cast that appear in that portion of the series. So you get to see the Aesops, Penny, Ironwood, Winter, and their appearances in this game, while lacking weight and that much actual screen time, are lovely, despite lacking an appearance from my favorite characters, Team Juniper, in any capacity. I brought up the specific episode this game's timeline takes place in earlier because of that reason. The show itself has rocketed past a lot of these guys' relevance, with basically all of them ending up in completely different places less than a season later. So this game and its location on the overall RWBY timeline serves as a nice little comfy time capsule reminding you of how fun and low stakes this current arc started. And that is kind of the best way I can describe the story of RWBY Arrowfell. It's comfy. It's a cute little adventure that kind of acts as a highlight reel of this point in the series. Characters who are fan favorites show up to strike a pose, get a little giggle out of me, and then move back into the background for the next character to do that exact same thing. And unlike a lot of RWBY spin-off media, this game is 100% canon, not side canon or canon adjacent, and is perfectly unintrusive and non-contradictory to the show, with most of its original made just for the game characters being one and done. But that one and done status doesn't make these guys any less valuable in my opinion. These original characters fit right at home in the RWBY universe, and while it would have been cool to see more of them, or even cooler to fight against actual named antagonists from the series, I can respect that their MO with this one was to create a story that could have reasonably happened without screwing with the canon timeline at all. And that mission statement of keeping everything canon and unintrusive is felt even more in the cutscenes. These cutscenes are animated to look like they are ripped directly from the show, and while there aren't that many of them, this is so cool to me. Authenticity in licensed games is something that I have always loved, and something that is usually lacking in the final product. But you see this, and you know they cared. And not just in the cutscenes, the presentation as a whole is pretty remarkable throughout the entire experience. The main art style of the game feels like an in-between of the main 3D show art style and the 2D stills drawn for promotion by Ian Lee, boiled down into a slightly chibi 2.5D art style that feels distinctly RWBY, with the 2D portraits also looking pretty at home during the game's dialogue segments. This swapping between the 2D, 3D, and hybrid art styles to an outsider may come off as inconsistent, but to be honest, RWBY's art is inconsistent in this exact same way, so it's right at home and not bad by any means. The gameplay, however, is bad by any means. Okay, maybe not bad, but unremarkable. At first glance, RWBY Arrowfell looks and feels like a Shantae clone, meaning a level-based Metroidvania where you unlock new skills to discover new collectibles, usually to give these collectibles to a quirky NPC. And that's not what Arrowfell is, but as you play through this game, that familiar feel begins to morph into wanting this game to feel like Shantae, instead of actually being like Shantae. The individual levels, while mostly styled and designed nicely, taking place in vaguely familiar show locations, are short and lack a lot of the exploration that you would hope a game being advertised as a non-linear action-adventure game would have. The main gimmick of the gameplay is switching between the 4 main characters and using their individual abilities to progress through combat and platforming. RWBY having the ability to perform a quick dash in the air, Weiss being able to create a platform to jump on that then performs a small attack, Blake's ability being that of creating clones to push buttons and attack remotely, and Yang's thing being able to do a big punch in order to break through certain obstacles. Each character also having different, but for the most part similar, ranged and melee attacks, but more on that later. Much like in the show proper, this game is at its best when its main cast is all given something to do together. And much like in the show proper, that doesn't always happen. And also, just like the show, these characters are not given equal footing at all in terms of balance. RWBY's dash is just so satisfying to spam and makes platforming and backtracking way less cumbersome. Blake's ability, summoning clones, effectively doubles and then later in the game triples her damage output, making certain bosses and enemy encounters an absolute breeze. Meaning that for the game's 2 main gameplay sections, platforming and combat, there is an objective best option. And even worse, those objective best options were my least favorite 2 of the main quartet. Add in that these abilities, while each getting upgraded once, are basically the only main toolkit Team RWBY has throughout the entire experience, and this game's attempt at the search action fun of a Metroidvania comes off as half-baked. Metroidvanias thrive on that feeling of progression, accessing new areas that you couldn't reach before, but whatever slight sense of progression felt by upgrading each character's sole ability one time is immediately wrung hollow by how most of these items found by said abilities are either pure fetch quests or skill points for the skill tree. Which, yeah, there's a skill tree. Formed from skill points formed around just random places in the world, it's mostly used to upgrade the combat abilities of the core cast. And well, combat is weird in Arrowfell. Each character has a singular melee attack and singular ranged attack, and as stated earlier, Blake breaks this system in half. Upgrade her first, and she will be the only character that you ever want to use during combat. But to be completely honest with you, I don't think the combat portions of this game are all that bad. Where the game feels the pressure of being a platforming adventure game and buckles, the combat section of the experience has real promise. And I definitely think there is an alternate timeline where this game focused more on that combat experience and ended up an ultimately better product because of it. Unfortunately, we're not in that timeline, but I still didn't dislike the combat as much as you might expect from my earlier scathing critiques of the gameplay. It's simple, but it's satisfying. I'm unsure if intentionally, but I actually found myself having probably the most fun that I've had in this game using Blake's clones to try and plot out where the best places to attack would be. It still feels underdeveloped as a whole, but it's clear that the combat was the core piece of the puzzle for WayForward, with these ambush segments taking up what feels like around 50% of the game. Which, however mindless you may view side-scroller combat like this, these segments are gauntlets with enemies ripped straight from the show, and are genuinely enjoyable to try and tackle. It's not the best combat system, but again, I would be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy the hell out of it. I just wish that progression in this half of the game wasn't enclosed in a flawed, non-linear platformer experience. In my opinion, this game would be greatly benefited by an RPG-style experience system being how you get your skill points instead of a half-baked platformer. And that right there brings me to my final thoughts. RWBY Arrowfell is half-baked, but I really liked it despite that. Objectively, there's too much brought to the table that didn't circle back in a satisfying way for me to really recommend it at its launch price of $30. Subjectively, if you're a RWBY fan, it's fun. There's clearly a lot of love felt here for the source material that makes this an entertaining experience, and that is more than you can say for a lot of other RWBY spin-off media. I'll leave you with this. If you weren't dead set on buying this already from the trailers, it's probably safe for you to skip. If you're a casual RWBY fan, it's a fun time that can probably be played in a couple of afternoons based off my playtime. But for $30, when most of WayForward's far superior offerings are cheaper, unless you're particularly attracted to the RWBY brand, it's not gonna blow your mind. It's a by-the-numbers platformer that feels like it didn't settle on one core defining trait early on enough in development to really feel like it was something all that special. And for a show like RWBY, with a mythos and combat style that is so remarkably unique, it's disappointing. And if you think that my channel is remarkably unique, then why don't you subscribe to RV Rocks and ring the bell, like this video, and comment your thoughts on RWBY and RWBY Arrowfell. I don't know how surprising my feelings towards this game are for fans of the property, but I want to find out oh so badly. So please let me know your thoughts either in the comments or on Twitter at RV Rocks Official. But before you do any of that, I have been RV Rocks, and thank you so much for watching. See ya!